It had been 3 months since Grace said yes to Samuel's proposal. Her world had blossomed into something she could barely recognize. Scholarship completed, a well-earned promotion to guest experience coordinator, and a future bound to the man who changed everything. Samuel Wright. The man who saw her before the world did, the man who believed in her even when her voice shook. Now she stood by his side, not in shadow but in strength. Together they were building something beautiful, an initiative to train underprivileged youth in hospitality. Grace's idea, Samuel's support, a shared dream. One evening, after a long planning session, they sat on the balcony of Samuel's penthouse, watching the stars. "You always stare at the sky like it's telling you secrets," Samuel teased. Grace smiled. "It does. The sky reminds me, no matter how dark things get, morning always comes." He leaned over and kissed her temple. "Well, as long as you're by my side, I'll never fear the night." But the night was already coming. The boardroom was thick with tension, the air electric with anticipation. Samuel sat at the head of the table, his face pale but resolute. Contracts lay open in front of him. This deal could define the future. He reached for his pen, but his hand trembled. A sharp breath escaped him. Then silence. Before anyone could react, Samuel slumped forward, collapsing onto the polished table. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped back. Panic surged like a wave. Grace rushed into the hospital an hour later, still in her uniform, her heart pounding like a drum. Doctors moved quickly. Machines beeped. Samuel lay unconscious. The diagnosis? Stress-induced cardiac arrest. He had been pushing too hard, working long hours, ignoring warning signs. Grace stood outside the ICU, fists clenched, tears spilling down her cheeks. The man who carried her through storms now lay behind glass, still and pale. And suddenly, the empire they built was now in her hands. The boardroom never felt this cold. Grace stood at the end of the long table, facing a row of expressionless executives, men and women in tailored suits who once nodded politely at her. When Samuel was in the room, now he wasn't. Samuel was still unconscious, stable but silent. And his empire, it was trembling. Wright Estates had shareholders to please, contracts to uphold, and an ambitious rival company, Fairgate International, waiting like vultures to strike. The board chair adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Miss Okoro, thank you for being here," he said. Grace nodded. "As you know, Mr. Wright appointed you as co-director of the Hospitality Impact Project. However, with his sudden condition, we need someone to represent his stake." "I will," Grace said softly. A few raised eyebrows. One executive leaned forward. "Miss Okoro, with respect, you're not a trained executive. You have no corporate experience." Grace took a breath. Her voice shook, but her spine held firm. "I may not have experience in suits and spreadsheets, but I have experience in survival, in service, in leading when no one notices." Silence. Then she added, "And if you're worried about image, let me remind you this entire project was born from one image, a cleaner who rose. And the world still remembers that." That struck something, but not everyone was convinced. Outside the room, murmurs flew. Can she really lead? She was just the girl who used to mop our floors. But Grace walked out of that boardroom, heels echoing on marble back straight. She wasn't trying to be Samuel. She was stepping into her own light because the storm hadn't taken her down. It had handed her the wheel. The next morning, Grace arrived early to Wright Estates Training Center. She was met with whispers again, not from doubt this time, but from confusion. Why was she leading meetings? Why was her ID badge upgraded? Why did Samuel's office assistant now report to her? Grace ignored it all. She had no time to explain herself to people who only valued titles. She had a hospital file on her nightstand and a full project proposal in her bag. But what she wasn't prepared for was the person waiting inside the conference room. Diana Sterling, dressed modestly, no designer shades, no camera crew, just her. Grace stopped in the doorway, startled. "What are you doing here?" Diana rose slowly, her hands folded behind her. Her voice was calm, almost reverent. "You promised you wouldn't use those files to destroy me, and you kept your word." She paused, meeting Grace's eyes. "I came because that kind of grace deserves a debt repaid." Grace folded her arms. "You owe a lot of people." Diana nodded. "I know, but I'm here to help. For real this time. No sabotage, no cameras, just skills." Grace raised a brow. "I studied PR before I got lost in fame," Diana continued. "I know how to manage press, handle brand crises, and navigate boardroom perception. And let's be honest, your face is everywhere right now. Half the city's watching to see if you fail." Grace didn't answer. Diana stepped forward. "Let me help protect what you and Samuel built, please." Grace searched her eyes, looking for deceit, ego, something familiar. But what she saw wasn't the Diana who once laughed behind tinted glass. It was someone broken, rebuilding. Grace gave a single nod. "Okay, but one lie, one stunt, and you're out." Diana smiled faintly. "Fair." And just like that, the girl from the mud and the girl who threw it sat at the same table. Because sometimes the best redemption starts with rebuilding what you once broke. Later that week, Grace stood by the glass elevator at Wright Estates, going over the final proposal for the youth training program. Her fingers were steady, but her mind was a battlefield. Samuel was still unconscious. His doctor said he might wake any day now, or not. Grace held on to hope, but hope had a way of whispering, not shouting. As she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. A text from Diana. "Be careful, just heard Fairgate is sending a team to our gala." Grace blinked. Fairgate at their gala. The annual Wright Estates Gala was just 2 nights away. Originally planned by Samuel to announce a multi-million naira expansion of their hospitality school. Now it would be Grace's first public test as the acting face of the company. The elevator doors opened, and standing in the lobby were 2 men in grey suits. Slick, smiling, too polished to be guests. "Miss Okoro," one of them said, "beautiful morning. I'm Marcus from Fairgate International. This is my colleague, David. Mind if we have a word?" Grace gave a tight smile. "Actually, I do." Marcus chuckled. "We just wanted to express our admiration. You've done a stunning job keeping things afloat." "Really," David added. "But let's be honest, you're new to this world, and Wright Estates, it's a heavy crown for someone. With your background." Grace stepped forward, calm, clear. "You're right. I am new to this world," she said, "but I've survived harder worlds than yours, and I didn't do it in a suit. I did it in silence, with scars." Marcus's smile faded. Grace leaned in. "If you came here to scare me, you should have worn boots. Because I don't slip on polished floors. I learned to run in mud." She walked past them. Neither man spoke again, but their eyes followed her, calculating, waiting. Because now they knew this wasn't Samuel's empire anymore. Grace was the storm they didn't expect. The lights were soft, the wine flowed, and every guest shimmered in designer fabric. But one seat remained empty, Samuel's. It was the first time the Wright Estates Gala was being held without him present. The room felt it, the board noticed it, and so did the press. Grace stood near the edge of the stage, wearing a royal blue gown. Simple, graceful, unforgettable. Her hair was tied in a low bun, a silver brooch clipped to her dress. Not for show, for strength. Diana stood a few steps behind her, now her head of PR for the event. She whispered, "You're trending already. Half the room is watching to see if you stumble." Grace's voice was steady. "Then let's give them something to remember." The music faded, the lights dimmed, and Grace stepped onto the stage. She paused, a beat, 2, then she began. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Okoro. Not too long ago, I cleaned the floors of this building. Today, I help build what it stands for." Gasps, cameras flashed. She continued, "This isn't a fairy tale. I wasn't rescued by a prince. I was seen by a man who believed that dignity doesn't come from status. It comes from how you treat others." She looked directly into the crowd. "Tonight, we unveil the Hospitality Futures program, a scholarship and mentorship platform for youth across country. Because the next Grace Okoro shouldn't have to be discovered. She should be prepared." Thunderous applause, tears, cheering. Even the toughest investors gave nods of approval. But in the far back corner of the gala stood a shadow. David from Fairgate, arms folded. He turned to whisper into his phone. "She's not just holding the empire, she's expanding it." A pause, then he added darkly, We'll need to change tactics." The morning after the gala, Grace sat on her balcony, a soft breeze brushing against her face as she cradled a warm cup of tea. The city was just waking. Inside, little Joy slept soundly, curled under a pale blanket, wrapped in the calm Grace had spent years learning how to give. Her phone buzzed on the table. Diana's name lit up the screen. Grace answered, her voice still husky from the night before. "Morning." "You broke the internet," Diana said, her tone light but proud. "Clips of your speech are everywhere. Even 2 European outlets ran headlines. They're calling it the rebirth of right estates." Grace let out a small, tired laugh. "That's good." She looked out at the horizon, trying to hold on to the rare moment of stillness. But then another vibration, her second message from an unknown number. "Not everyone clapped for you last night. Check your email." The warmth in her chest chilled instantly. Grace opened her inbox. Subject: urgent internal leak. She clicked. What she saw made her blood run cold. Attached were images, doctored but terrifyingly convincing. Edited photos showing fake wire transfers, falsified financial reports, and fabricated emails. Each file was crafted to make it look like Grace had been siphoning company funds. The names, logos, and signatures looked disturbingly real. It was calculated, professional, aimed to ruin her. Her hand trembled as she pushed back from the table. The mug beside her untouched. For a long second she couldn't move, just stared at the screen, the weight of it pressing down. Then she grabbed her phone and called the only person who had seen the vultures circling. "Diana," she whispered when the line connected, "I need you, now." 15 minutes later, Diana stepped onto the balcony, her heels clicking softly. She was still in her blazer from an early meeting, phone in hand, lips parted to speak. But the moment she saw Grace's face, the smile disappeared. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tightening as she stepped forward. Grace didn't answer. She just handed her the laptop. Diana took it, glanced at the screen, and froze. "They're trying to frame you," she said. This looks like an inside job." Grace stared into the distance. "They couldn't beat me publicly. Now they're planting weeds in the soil I grew from." Diana looked up. "What do you want to do?" Grace stood. "Trace it, quietly. I want to know who's behind this, not guesses, proof. And then," Grace's voice was still, "then we fight fire with roots. I won't burn, I'll grow through it." Diana nodded. "I'll call a friend in cyber forensics." Meanwhile, across town, David sat at a private club sipping espresso. A younger associate whispered, "The files have been sent. She'll crack soon." David smiled without joy. She won't know what hit her. But what he didn't know, Grace had survived worse than lies, and this time she wasn't alone. 3 days went by. 3 long, quiet days. The fake documents didn't appear online. But the warning stayed with Grace like a shadow. They had told her to step down quietly. Or they would. Release it. But Grace didn't break. She didn't run. She built. She met with Diana and a digital forensics expert in a quiet cafe outside town. No paparazzi, no assistants, just strategy. The expert, a soft-spoken woman named Amaka, handed Grace a tablet. These files were built using your old HR paperwork and an outdated signature scan from the hotel's archived system. They used real pieces of your life to make fake accusations look real. Grace exhaled. "Do we know who sent it?" Amaka nodded. "We traced the IP to a company device, Right Estates." Diana's eyes widened. "Someone inside?" Amaka scrolled. "Yes, but not who you think. The user profile matches one of the junior finance analysts, a man named Brian Sterling." Grace frowned. "I've never even spoken to him." Diana's lips tightened. "You don't have to. Someone paid him to do this." Amaka nodded again. "One more thing. The files were accessed by a third party before being sent to you, through a secure proxy address." Grace leaned in. "Fairgate." Amaka smiled faintly. "Bingo." The pieces snapped together like thunder. David hadn't just tried to rattle her. He planted a landmine and waited. Grace stood from the table, eyes clear. No press, no drama. Let's gather every trace. When I move, I want it to be final. That evening, she walked into Wright Estates with the same calm she used to wear when pushing cleaning carts down the VIP floor. Everyone thought the empire was Samuel's. But Grace, she was its roots, and she was done shrinking. Grace moved like a storm no one saw coming. By Monday morning, she had summoned a private meeting with the Wright Estates Internal Ethics Committee. The members were surprised, but Grace had the authority. Samuel had once made sure of that. In the room sat only a few: Diana, the lead internal auditor, 2 legal officers, and Grace. Brian, the junior analyst who helped forge the false financial reports, walked in nervously. He didn't know why he was there. Yet Grace stood at the front, silent for a beat, then spoke. Over the last week, attempts have been made to fabricate documents tied to my name. The aim was to discredit me and cripple this project. She turned to the screen behind her. With one tap, a marker's digital trail came to life. Email headers, device IDs, login times, file creation timestamps, the IP addresses, the access logs, and finally, a full recording of Brian's screen. Caught exporting a fake ledger entry. Brian's face went pale. Grace turned to him. "Do you deny this?" I was just following instructions," he stammered. "It wasn't my plan. I was paid." Grace held up a hand. "By whom?" Brian hesitated. Then, "David Hassan, Fairgate International." The room fell into stunned silence. Diana leaned forward. "He bribed a Wright employee to destroy Grace's name and tank the hospitality program." The lead auditor stood slowly. "Miss Okoro, we'll begin disciplinary action immediately and report this to authorities. You have our full support." Grace simply nodded. "Thank you, and one more thing." She pulled out a sealed envelope. "A formal motion to end any pending partnership talks with Fairgate. We don't build with snakes." No one objected. As Brian was let out, Grace's eyes never flinched. Because this time, the trap wasn't for her. It was hers. The sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting golden light across the windows of City General Hospital. Grace sat beside Samuel's hospital bed, fingers gently stroking his palm. Machines beeped softly in the background, steady but slow, like a clock waiting for its cue. She had just come from the ethics committee meeting. Her voice was calm, her back was straight. But now, alone with him, she finally let her guard drop. She whispered, "They tried to take everything, Samuel. They tried to say I didn't belong." Again. She looked at his sleeping face. "But I remembered what you told me." She reached into her bag and brought out a small folded paper, the very first anonymous note she ever received at the hotel a year ago. "For the girl who works with Grace, even when the world is unkind." Grace smiled faintly. "That was you, wasn't it?" Just then, his hand moved. Slight, barely noticeable, but it moved. Grace's breath caught. "Samuel?" His fingers twitched again, his eyelids fluttered. She pressed the nurse's call button, heart racing. "He's moving, he's waking up." Within moments, nurses and the attending doctor rushed in. Monitors beeped faster, clearer, and then Samuel's eyes slowly opened. They were unfocused at first, but then locked on the one face he had always searched for. "Grace," he croaked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She laughed through them. "You scared me." His voice was weak. "You held the empire?" She leaned in. "I didn't just hold it, I grew it." A faint smile touched his lips. "Knew you would." The doctor nodded. "He's stable, he needs rest, but he's back." Grace sat back down, holding his hand tighter than ever. The lion was awake again, but the world had already seen something more terrifying than power, a woman who didn't flinch when left alone in the jungle. 2 weeks later, the buzz around Wright Estates reached new heights. Grace Okoro had not only survived the smear campaign, she had dismantled it, exposed the mole, and expanded the hospitality program with new funding from international investors. And now she was about to do something Samuel had always wanted but never dared. A public town hall, not for billionaires, for the people, for hospitality workers, cleaners, kitchen staff, bellboys, those who made the industry breathe but were never given a voice. The press gathered in a large open courtyard. The banner above read, "Dignity of Service," a vision by Grace Okoro. Samuel was there, still recovering, sitting quietly in a wheelchair under the shade, dressed in light grey with a soft blanket over his knees. Diana sat beside him, now head of corporate responsibility. Her eyes gleamed with something she never used to know: humility. Grace stepped up to the mic. She wore a white blouse, navy trousers, and no jewelry. Her voice was clear, unshaken, not rehearsed. Real. 2 years ago, I scrubbed hotel floors and went home with blisters. I wasn't lazy, I wasn't invisible, but to the world, I didn't matter. She paused. Then someone saw me. But what if he hadn't? Would I still be down there? Would I still be silent? She looked out at the crowd, workers, youth, dreamers. I don't want the next Grace Okoro to wait for a miracle. I want her to walk into a system that already values her. She stepped back, letting her words breathe. The crowd rose in applause, not out of politeness, but because something deep had shifted. Not just in right estates, in the industry, in perception. Samuel's eyes welled with tears. He had always dreamed of changing the system. But Grace? She was the change. 2 days after the town hall, just as Grace's momentum was reaching its peak, an emergency call came through. Samuel's assistant burst into Grace's office. "We have a breach," he said, pale. "Investor files, bank records, internal correspondence. They were leaked online." Grace stood instantly. From where? An off-site server. The breach happened through a third-party supplier tied to Fairgate's old contract. Grace's heart pounded. This wasn't about her anymore. They were coming for Samuel. She raced downstairs to the executive floor, where Samuel had just arrived for his first official meeting since the hospital. The moment their eyes met, she knew he already knew. He stood slowly, leaning slightly on a cane. "They're trying to break the foundation now," he said quietly. Grace pulled out her phone. "I'll call a press conference. We'll respond. Deny. Deflect." Samuel shook his head. "No, we don't defend shadows with more shadows." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Grace, you've led this empire with integrity. Don't let fear make you a mirror of them." She took a shaky breath. "Then what do we do?" Samuel turned to the board. "We open every file. We release the truth ourselves." Gasps rippled through the room. One executive said, "That's suicidal. It'll expose everything." Samuel smiled faintly. "Not if we have nothing to hide." Grace nodded slowly. Truth was painful, but it was also invincible. Later that evening, Wright Estates released a full transparency report to the public. Every past transaction, donor file, and staff audit. Samuel stood beside Grace in the live stream. "We built this company on trust," he said. "So we're choosing to keep it clean, even if the cost is high." And to their surprise, the cost wasn't loss, it was loyalty. Investors praised the move. Former critics called it courageous. And Fairgate, they tried one more stunt. But no one cared anymore, because when your house is made of truth, lies can't break the windows. One evening, Grace and Samuel sat beneath the courtyard tree as the sun slipped behind the rooftops, and birds sang overhead. "I never imagined peace would feel like this," Grace said, sipping her juice. Samuel leaned in with a smile. "You made it happen." She shook her head gently. "No, we did." He took her hand, now adorned with the ring that once felt like a dream. "What's next?" he asked. Grace smiled. "We teach, we raise leaders, we stay rooted." "And your father?" Grace's smile dimmed, but her voice stayed calm. "Still in prison, but I pray for him." Samuel watched her in awe. "How do you hold so much pain and still bloom?" Grace looked at the tree above them. "Because pain taught me where the light is." Samuel held her gaze. "You've forgiven the world, Grace, but have you forgiven him?" She was quiet for a long moment, then she stood. "I think it's time I tried." It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. No cameras, no headlines. Just the hum of tires against gravel as a black car pulled up to the Federal Correctional Center on the outskirts of town. Grace stepped out, holding tightly to Joy's hand. The little girl wore a yellow cardigan, her eyes wide but calm. She didn't know everything, but she knew they were here for someone who once hurt her sister and who once tried to take her. Grace took a breath. The sun was warm, but her palms were cold. Inside the visitors' hall, Peter Okoro sat in a grey uniform, head bowed, hands folded. He looked smaller now, thinner, quieter. Time had stripped him of pride, of rage. When Grace walked in, he didn't lift his head. Not at first, but when he saw Joy beside her, his eyes welled up. Slowly, shakily, he stood. "Grace," he said barely above a whisper, "you came." She sat across from him, Joy beside her. "I wasn't sure I should," Grace replied softly, but Joy asked questions, and I believe in answers. Peter turned to the little girl. "You've grown," he said gently. "You look just like your mom." Joy stayed quiet, her small hand holding Grace's tightly. Peter looked back at Grace. "I'm sorry," he wiped his eyes, "not just for what I did recently, but for everything. For leaving when your mum was dying. For choosing shame over responsibility. For making you carry pain that should have been mine." Grace didn't speak for a moment, then she leaned forward, voice steady but soft. "You broke us," she said. "You broke her, and you nearly broke me." Peter nodded slowly, tears sliding down his cheeks. "But," she continued, "we healed, we found our peace, and I came today not to give you comfort." He lowered his head, bracing. "But to give you something harder." He looked up. Grace's eyes glistened. "I forgive you." He choked on a breath. "Why?" "Because I don't want to carry you anymore. I have dreams to build, and a little girl who needs love, not bitterness." She stood slowly and reached for Joy's hand. As they turned to leave, Peter stood, trembling. "Grace." She paused. "Thank you," he whispered, broken and undone. "You didn't have to, but you did. You're stronger than I ever was." Grace looked back one last time. "I had to be," she said, "because you weren't." Then she walked away, head high, soul light. Joy looked up at her. "Are you okay?" Grace smiled. "I am now." And as they stepped into the sunlight outside the prison gates, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Release. Because true freedom doesn't always begin with escape. Sometimes it begins with forgiveness. The sun rose gently over the hills of City, casting golden light on the courtyard of the riverside estate. White lilies lined the aisle, golden chairs curved around a marble fountain. The breeze carried soft notes of a string quartet across the air. But even that music paused when Grace stepped forward. Her gown was flowing ivory silk, her hair tied in a soft bun. Her brooch shimmered gently on her dress. She walked alone, not because she had no one, but because this walk belonged to her. Every step carried the past, and honored it. At the altar stood Samuel, eyes misting. Joy stood nearby as flower girl, wearing a sash that read, "Future CEO." Diana sat in the front row, wiping away a quiet tear. When Grace reached Samuel, he whispered, "You made it." She whispered back, "We made it." "Do you, Samuel, write?" "I do." "Do you, Grace Okoro?" "I do." When the rings were exchanged, the crowd rose. They weren't just witnessing a wedding, they were witnessing prophecy fulfilled. Grace turned to the sky, the same sky she once looked up at from the roadside, only now, she wasn't praying for a new life, she was walking in it. That evening, Grace stood on the rooftop. No photographers, no gowns, just string lights and a sky painted in quiet purple. Samuel came beside her. "It feels like the end of something," he said. Grace shook her head. "Number, it's the beginning of everything else." He nodded. "You know what amazes me?" She looked at him. "You never let the mud keep you down. You turned it into soil." Grace smiled faintly. "And you? Samuel Wright, you watered the roots." They stood there in silence, overlooking the city they once watched from opposite worlds. Now together, planted, rooted, blooming. The end. If you loved this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more captivating stories like this one.